My name is Neha, and I'm a total Phil fan, and I work at the Digital Currency Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. So the Digital Currency Initiative is a little over a year old, so it was started in April the year before, and the idea behind it is that digital currencies, in particular cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, are very exciting and they're very interesting. They kind of bring about a whole new way of thinking, a whole new paradigm, and but at the same time, Bitcoin's been around for about 7 years now, but there hasn't been the same level of academic research, and there hasn't been, kind of that rigor put into this field yet. There's been some, but not a ton. And so the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT is kind of a vehicle to work on problems in this space and to think about what the future is going to look like with more prevalent, pervasive digital currency.
Cool. So I think this is a question everyone asks you, but I think myself and a lot of people, we've heard about Bitcoin, but we really don't know much about it. What would be your super quick intro on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? Because I know we can go on for hours and hours on this, but
we can have some philosophical conversation.
So it's up to you to provide the best explanation, because I've always heard various roundabout explanations of varying levels of detail. But
okay, do you want the computer science explanation, or do you want the everybody explanation?
I think I want the consumer explanation.
You want the consumer explanation. Okay. So if I have, let's say, a dollar, right? A dollar is something that we've all decided has value, right? And we've all decided, if I give you a dollar, you can take this dollar and you can give it to somebody else, and it'll mean the same thing to everybody, pretty much, right? A dollar is a dollar, and it's really useful. We can use it to exchange for goods and services. Now, dollars are awesome, but I kind of have to be there to give you one. I can't really take a dollar and shove it through this camera just yet, right? This is not working. You could take a picture of it if you wanted to, but that's not really going to work. In fact, that's kind of illegal. So that's not a good way of transferring money digitally. And that's what we want to do. We want to figure out how to do it digitally. We want to figure out how to do it instantaneously when we're not in the same spot. And we actually have a bunch of really awesome ways for doing that right now. We've had them for 20 years. Credit cards, PayPal, Venmo, bank transfer, wires. We've had all these ways of doing digital money transfer, and they work pretty well. Usually they work pretty well, but sometimes there are some problems. And when there is a problem, like PayPal has decided that you are a fraudulent spammer and they're going to freeze your account, you don't really have any recourse. That money, if you're a PayPal merchant and PayPal decides that about you, that money is locked up, because that digital money isn't really ours. That digital money belongs to PayPal or to Visa or to Venmo or, name your favorite internet digital money transfer company right now. And, sometimes that's okay, but sometimes that's really not okay. And that money doesn't exist as our own money. It exists as entries and databases in the machines of those companies. And I think the problem with that is that really stifles innovation. It makes it so that in order to innovate on the platform of money, we have to convince these companies to implement features and to implement API calls and to do all this stuff. And it's really frustrating. It's frustrating that our money is held in these other companies' hands. And so Bitcoin is actually a very clever way of doing digital money without any company, without anybody standing in the middle, without anybody actually holding the digital money on their servers, because the way that it works is that everybody is kind of working on this system together. And it works the same way that it would work as if you had a ledger, basically. That's the big idea behind Bitcoin. The way that it works, I've heard it described, and I really like this explanation. I've heard it described as magic paper. So imagine that I had a sheet of paper, okay? And I gave you a sheet of paper too. And the way that this paper works is that if I write something on my sheet of paper, it magically appears on your sheet of paper as well, right? So you put something on here and it just shows up on your paper, no matter where you are in the world. So now imagine we gave everybody a sheet of this paper, and we all started writing down things like, I'm going to give $5 to Phil, And Phil, maybe you write, I'm going to give $4 to Max. And all these transactions would start like appearing all over the world. And what we'd end up with is we'd end up with this like list of transfers. You know, that's what a ledger is. It's kind of like this list of like who gave who what. And that's Bitcoin. That is literally Bitcoin. It's a way of doing digital money without any companies, without anybody standing in the middle. And it works because we all work on it together and we all keep this ledger together.
Cool. That's probably the best explanation I've heard. So that's awesome. This is good that, that now the world has this explanation, because you usually hear about it in either like popular press articles that just mention it in one sentence, like Bitcoin, new currency, blah, blah, or it's like some computer sciencey paper on Hacker News, and it's like, I don't want to read through all that. So I like that level. So going back to the cash analogy, so I think people understand, most people in the world hopefully understand cash because it's a physical thing, right? Because in a lot of other countries, especially in the developing world, credit cards and stuff are not trusted and banks are not trusted, but people accept paper currency. So
banks go out of business. Yeah.
What kind of bridges would you draw between analogies between, if you're trying to explain Bitcoin to say someone who just knows about cash, like physical pieces of currency, like what, how would that explanation be altered to fit that world? Because, the explanation you gave is for someone who is kind of technologically savvy, who knows about PayPal and buys stuff online and knows that currency is some kind of digital thing in the ether, and it's good to not have it be centralized on company servers. But what about if it's like one of my older relatives that just knows about cash? Like, what kind of value proposition does that Bitcoin or stuff have for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that you can't, like, kind of what I was talking about earlier with pictures. You can't take a picture of a dollar bill and send it to someone. You have to actually be there to give them the cash, right? And I think that if you're operating in like a small town or something where you do have that physical presence, then use the cash. Cash is great. Cash is awesome. It's when we want to start transacting with people who aren't in physical proximity, who are around the world, that we need to have some other ideas, some other solutions.
Cool. Yeah, so along with the cash thing, I mean, one danger of the cash thing is, it getting physically stolen or lost. So how does Bitcoin kind of deal with that?
I think that there's still a lot of danger in your Bitcoin getting stolen or lost. So I wouldn't say Bitcoin is more secure than cash exactly. It's just different. It just works in a different way. And I think, I'm obviously very excited about the future that cryptocurrencies, might bring about. I'm really interested in this, but I will be the first to admit that there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues with things we have to think about. So for example, when you log into your email account or, when you like log into your iPad, you usually enter a password, right? And people are pretty good at passwords. I mean, they're not great, but at least people know what passwords are, right? Passwords are this like funny thing that I have to memorize, and I shouldn't tell anybody else what my password is. But if I forget my password, it's okay. I can just kind of like click the forgot password button and someone will send me a new one, and we'll figure something out, or I'll call the company up and, I'll get a new password. Bitcoin doesn't work based on passwords. It works based on public-private key pairs, which is an aspect of cryptography. So it's just like a whole different paradigm. It's just a whole different way of thinking. I've heard a lot of different analogies for it. I've heard like safe and keys and lockbox, and none of these analogies are great. And I don't think that people have really great mental models. And so I'm actually pretty worried about this problem.
Yeah, so the security thing, I mean, I don't know much about this, but so what would be the analogy of someone, not to turn this super negative, but what would be the analogy of someone, stealing a wallet full of cash in Bitcoin terms? Is it someone taking your computer physically, someone getting some kind of password or access? Like, what does that mean to have someone take your Bitcoins?
I think what it means is someone steals your private key and you didn't have it memorized, and that private key has the ability to unlock a certain amount of Bitcoin. And so when they have your private key, you no longer have the ability to move that Bitcoin, meaning that you can't pay anyone. And they have the ability to move it wherever they want. And it's really interesting because, I was talking about how Bitcoin works, and it's like these magic sheets of paper and everybody can see all the transactions. Everything's public, so you can watch your Bitcoin getting stolen from you, like as it's getting stolen. Like you can look at it's called the blockchain. You can look at this ledger and be like, yep, there goes my Bitcoin. I can't do anything about it. So I think the private key is the right sort of analogy to that.
That makes sense. So turning to applications, what do you feel would be the killer app for this, right? So when we ever talk about new technology platforms, people talk about a killer app, right? The spreadsheet for office personal computing, the I don't know, Angry Birds or whatever for touchscreen iPhones. So would you feel like are possibilities for these killer applications?
That's an interesting question, because we definitely had computers for a very long time, personal computers, before we had spreadsheets, and touchscreens and iPhones existed for at least like a couple of years before Angry Birds, I would say. Maybe I'm a little long on that, but I think that the space is really exciting, and we're still trying to figure out what the next exciting, like there's a lot of contenders for what could be the next application. There's a lot of people thinking big and getting very excited. I think we're in a stage right now where we really need to experiment and build and understand and figure out which problems are really well suited to this technology and which problems maybe just need something else. So I still think like money is like the big thing here, digital money. In particular, I think what's really interesting is we'll have the ability to do what some people call programmable money. And what I mean by programmable money is that we can now start to attach computer code and programs to transactions. And one small example of that is like maybe we can do things like micropayments now. Maybe we can pay people like tiny fractions of a cent, depending upon how much of some resource they buy or they provide. And we can start to kind of meter resources in different ways. We can start to create new revenue streams that didn't exist before. There's a company called 21 that is really all about building this thing they call the machine payable web. And the idea is that you could like now assign a price to every API call that you make. And it just kind of opens up a different way of thinking, because right now, if you're building an application and you have to take payments, it's kind of a pain. It's a huge pain. And a lot of companies have sprung up trying to solve this problem, make it easier to take credit cards, invent a new form of digital cash, try to make it easier to send money between you and your friends. But they don't really all work together. Like there isn't one form of digital cash. There's like all these different companies doing different kinds of digital cash. And so I think that when we get to a more ubiquitous form of digital money, we'll be able to build lots of different kinds of applications that'll be really cool.
Cool. So do you feel like it's going to start with the most technologically savvy applications of, webmasters or, cloud providers who want to provide micropayments, or people who are going to use this for very technical sorts of services and APIs, rather than directly leapfrogging that and going directly to the end user consumers? Or do you feel like there is some kind of a potential killer application for consumers right away? Like you made the computer analogy, right? Computers were in use for many years before they became consumer accessible. And do you feel like this cryptocurrency, you think, will follow a similar trajectory from the very, very nerdy experts to everybody?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think it's going to take a while to figure out what the right applications are and how to build them in a way that's usable. So one thing I've seen from this technology, I talked about programmable money and how I think a ubiquitous form of it could be really powerful and could unlock a lot. I also, what a lot of people talk about as well is, and this I'm a little fuzzier on, but it's an interesting topic, is this idea of trust, and taking paradigms where you have this central intermediary, this person or this company or this entity providing the trust, providing the backing, and removing that so that it opens up the world so that lots of different people can do whatever it was that intermediary was doing, and you can do it in a trustless environment. So for example, you could handle things like votes, maybe this helps unlock things like digital voting. I don't know if that's the case, but that's kind of like an idea that some people are kicking around. Maybe it helps people agree on governance rules. Maybe it helps people, we just saw this crazy experiment that kind of spectacularly failed, which was trying to do communal investing. So investing based on kind of like voting and rules. And it's not easy. We haven't figured it out yet, but removing like VCs from the equation, like that's kind of crazy. What kind of world does that enable if like several people can get together around the world and decide to pool their money and invest in something seamlessly and without worrying about it getting stolen? Like that could change a lot. That could really change a lot. And so I think it will start with the nerds. Like, I think it started with Bitcoin as money. Just straight up, let's use Bitcoin to pay for things and buy things. And it started with speculation. Let's speculate on the price of this currency and see what happens and see if we can make some money. It's going to move into the layer, I think, of platforms and technology and protocols. And then only once that is really sorted out and figured out will we get to this. Once that's stable, we'll get to a place where we'll start to see like a lot of innovation in applications.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's even beyond personal computing or computing that we're very familiar with, this is trying to tap at a much more older and fundamental idea of currency exchange, right? Like this stuff has been around since, thousands of years when people invented coins and ways to exchange services for something, right? So this idea of currency of intrinsically it has no value, but we need a placeholder, like you said, a ledger for, I'm going to let you borrow my ox and you should help me, make a piece of cloth for my kid, right? And we can't keep track of all of it, so we'll invent some kind of money. This is as old as civilization itself, so this could be a huge thing. Not to get too futurist or TED Talk about it, but this is way older than even thinking about computers, right? I mean, people 3,000, 5,000 years ago weren't thinking about computation. They were thinking about how do we get along with each other and have some way to ensure fairness and trust and scale up civilization. So you're on a good topic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've been learning so much about money, and there's a lot of disagreement as well. So economists kind of say that money has three purposes. One is as a store of value, another is as a unit of account, and a third is for transactions, like to actually do exchanges. And so it's interesting to think of money in these three different contexts. I think Bitcoin itself has actually been categorized in several different ways by various parts of even just one government, the United States government. Like, I think that one branch calls it money, another branch calls it a security, another branch calls it something else. What is it exactly? Is it a contract? Is it a program? Is it, there aren't actually really any Bitcoins anywhere. So it's very difficult to think about it in terms of the language and sort of the rules and the structure that we have right now. So it's really something quite different. But thinking about it through the lens of money and the history of money is quite fascinating, because you're absolutely right. Like, there's actually a book called Debt: The First 5,000 Years, which kind of makes the case that coins and art, markers of money, currency, is actually pretty new. And this idea of credit, of a ledger, is much, much, much older, of kind of keeping track of like who produced what and what exchanges were made. And it's really like, it's a fundamental building block of society, is doing these exchanges and working together. It's like what brings us together. It creates community. And oftentimes things like precious metals were used as coin or currency, but those things aren't valuable in and of themselves. Like, people say that gold has an inherent value because it can be used in manufacturing, but really, like, the best currencies are the things that don't actually have any value. Like, they have value because we decided they should have value. Like, we together as a society collectively have decided they should be markers. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I guess I want to zoom out a bit, because we can imagine zooming in infinitely on this topic. I guess I want to get a bit more reflective in the sense of, what I find your strengths to be are, you're deeply technical. You have really good ability to, obviously, as evidenced by this podcast, to be able to communicate with a really wide audience about technical things. And you also, I think the third killer thing is I feel like you have really good taste in terms of where to put your efforts. So
we'll see.
I guess thinking back, in terms of however much you want to reflect back on your past history with technical work and stuff, how did you end up getting here and doing this thing at this point in time? And what did you feel drew you here to this place at this time? Because it must have not been just some random thing out of nowhere. So whatever you like to riff on that, I'd be happy to hear.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a lot of serendipity, and also a few things that I learned about myself. So a year ago, I graduated from the PhD program here. And as you well know, that's like quite an interesting emotional experience. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how you work and what you're interested in and what you want to be. You learn a lot about what you don't want to be. And so And so a year ago in June, I was coming out of that. I had, turned in my thesis. I had defended. I was done. I was like, okay, this chapter is closed, right? And normally PhD students usually kind of try to get a job before they graduate. So they usually kind of try to figure out what they're going to do next. And I explicitly decided that I was not going to do that. And it's really funny, like people would ask me, so what are you going to do? And I was like, you know what? I've decided to just take some time off. I'm going to travel. I'm going to think. I'm going to relax. I'm going to recover. And I'm going to really just kind of try to let myself figure out what I want to do next. I'm not going to jump into anything. And everyone said, that's such a great idea, except no one else does it. Like no one does it. So I was like, yeah, you're all saying it's a great idea, but no one ever decides to actually do this. So, so I decided to actually do it. And, I spent a lot of time traveling and visiting friends and doing different things. And I started looking into different areas, to think about, what I wanted to work on next. And I knew that I wanted to work on something that I thought was good for the world and exciting and interesting and would be helpful for people. I also knew that I had a certain skill set, and I had worked in this area called systems, and I had specifically worked on databases, but I was kind of generally interested in distributed systems and data more broadly. And I also realized that going through my PhD, I think the work that I did was really interesting, but I wanted to have a connection to people now and to problems now. Like I wanted to feel like the work that I was doing might help with real problems that people are facing today. And working on databases, I think, just didn't give me that feeling. I didn't really get that sense of satisfaction. I didn't feel like I was actually addressing problems, like big problems in the real world. I felt like maybe I was working on stuff that might help Facebook go 2% faster or something like that. So, so I really, I kind of had that in mind, and I started exploring. And the work that I did in my PhD was around performance in databases. Sometimes one aspect of performance is scalability, which means the ability to use more and more machines and get better and better performance. And I started hearing about, I'd had a lot of friends who were into Bitcoin very early. And so I'd heard about it very early and dismissed it because it really seemed very political. It seemed like it was all about kind of overthrowing the government and, forming an alternative to the US dollar. And while that's kind of interesting and exciting, that wasn't really something that really spoke to me. Well, what happened was I found out that Bitcoin was having trouble scaling. So Bitcoin was having a lot of performance issues. And so that was kind of, I was like, I know a little bit about this topic. Maybe I should read more about it and see what's going on here.
That seemed like the crucial thing from what I hear is that you're in, at MIT, you're in a PhD program, and you're in Cambridge, you're around a lot of really tech savvy, knowledgeable people, and you hear about Bitcoin. And the first impression I got as well is like, oh, it's these crypto anarchists who want to, these crypto anarchist libertarian folks who want to overthrow the currency and all that stuff. And it's like a lot of talk. And then at what point did you hear about the scaling thing? And how did you get in a position to hear about that? Because that's something that seems like a unique.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's part of the serendipity. I'm not exactly sure how I heard about it. It might have been like a message to an email list that I'm on. There was a conference that was happening in Montreal in September. And so it's possible that I heard about the conference, and it's called the Scaling Bitcoin Workshop. So maybe that's what piqued my interest. I was like, oh, what's going on with this? It really, and it was organized by someone at MIT. So it's possible that I just kind of heard about it through those channels. But I think also, and I'm not really sure exactly what order these things happened in, at some point I found out that a lot of people were looking at cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and there's another one called Ethereum that's also very popular. And in these cryptocurrencies, they were seeing like a solution to a lot of really interesting problems. So there were people in the government who are looking at cryptocurrencies, and in particular, this idea of a ledger that a lot of people work on together and is very difficult to kind of change. People in government were saying, hey, maybe this is a way that we want to start storing our records. People who deal with refugees were saying, hey, maybe this is a place where we can store pointers to digital forms of identification. People in oil and gas were saying maybe this is a way that we can track how much oil we're producing and how energy is moving around. It was just insane, the wide variety of fields of people who were interested in this topic and who saw something in this. And to be honest, I thought they were all crazy. I was like, you just want a database.
This is all during your PhD, though. You're kind of doing your PhD, but you were
this was after I graduated. This was all post PhD. All post PhD.
You were full time thinking about this, and that makes sense. Cool. Okay, and then fast forwarding. So you had that kind of explicit break after the PhD. You kind of had the serendipitous moments, and then when did you decide to take the plunge and say, I want to do this, instead of keeping on going with your break?
So as usual, it wasn't like a decision so much as a series of small steps. So I don't usually take big plunges into things very lightly, and so I ran into someone who told me about this group at the Media Lab and kind of talked to me a bit about what they were looking for. I came in, I talked to the people here, I had some really good conversations, and it just sounded like there was a lot of really interesting stuff to learn. This area is actually very, very related to the topic of consensus and distributed systems, which is something that I really enjoy thinking about. And that I was excited to think more about. And so that was very interesting to me. It was just this like great mix of like, esoteric research area that I find interesting and exciting, plus like ability to affect the world, plus cool opportunity and place to do it, right? So it's kind of a mix of those things. And so I just kind of tried it out. Like I was already in Cambridge. It wasn't like a big deal. I just kind of walked down the street and went from one building to another on MIT's campus. So it was pretty reasonable.
Awesome. All right, this is really, really awesome. We got to wrap up. Any last parting thoughts about this topic, or I guess a meta topic of advice you might give to other folks who might be wanting to kind of follow in your trajectory or career path or something? Any last thoughts?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. So just to recap, you wanted more like last thoughts on like other people trying to find a career path or the meta topic or whatever.
From grad school. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I guess I would say to people, like, think outside the box and don't feel like you have to do what everyone else is doing. Try to give yourself space to figure out what it is that you want to do and what your skill set is, and think about the skills that you want to develop. There's a lot more than just research or programming or even like system design. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff you can learn. There's a lot of different types of people to learn from. And I think going to grad school and getting a PhD puts you in a place where if like the one thing that I know everyone who gets one has learned is they've learned how to learn. Like they've learned how to dive into an area they know nothing about and just like figure it out. And that's a very powerful tool. That's a very powerful tool to have in your toolbox, is to know that you can do that. So
that is awesome. Yeah. You're the greatest asset and advertisement for the PhD now. You're going to be the poster.
No. Do not believe everyone should get a PhD, but yeah.
The other thing I got from our conversation, beyond the, what you just said about the learning to learn and the personal thing, is also the idea that if you're in the place where the future is happening, or if you're in Cambridge, or you're in San Francisco, or you're in somewhere where that's the people living in the future, then you get, and also you're open-minded, like you are, that you're not just heads down, I'm just going to do this small research area. You're very open-minded and broad in terms of looking outward as well. Then these serendipitous things do occur. And I think that's, it is serendipity, but it's also because you're the sort of person who has kind of an open mind about this. It isn't just tunnel visioning in one thing. So I think it's a great skill.
Yeah, and I think what I learned is I have to do the two things in different phases of time. Like there's a time for tunnel vision, there's a time to be broad, and I explicitly was like, okay, now I'm done tunnel visioning, I'm going to be broad. And I think that can be really helpful, is to break it up like that too. I'm sure you do the same thing, Phil.
That's a really good point as well. Yeah, I will agree 100%. All right, we will go. I'll go offline. We'll chat for a bit. All right, Neha, thank you so much.
Bye.